Well, good morning. Children's spot was fantastic as always. I love that every single week. And the Weebs children just put the exclamation mark on it. All right? Love it. I love that. Okay. I had a hard time with this, and I started preparing very early for the lesson today. I'm getting a little bit, y'all are having to walk through this process of me learning how I want to preach, I guess, what kind of preacher I want to be. I'm kind of not a preacher, I'm more of a teacher. I'm kind of finding my place, and y'all are all walking with me, and I really appreciate that you are walking with me. But I started very early this time, and it's a good thing I did because I was called away. Well, I offered to go because a friend of mine who lives here was visiting in the Metroplex and ended up in the ICU unit, unresponsive. She's a brittle diabetic. And it was a cascade of a whole lot of things, but she, starting from Tuesday morning all the way until I got there, once they intubated her, I decided to go ahead and go. Her daughter was there. Her daughter lives there, and her daughter just had a baby 4 weeks ago, and her daughter's trying to care for her, and the mother-in-law is trying to help care for the baby and the 3-year-old, and it was just this huge thing. But since I don't really have to be back at school until Monday, I decided to go. And so it was a really good thing. This was a fortuitous thing. So I thought a lot about this because until I left yesterday afternoon, she was not responsive. We were not sure if she would ever get, the big word that the nurses used was mentation. She would never get her mental faculties back. We had no idea what was going to happen. But I had to think about, and that's what's so fortuitous about this, is this passage that I chose is talking about death. And so I had already prepared the PowerPoint, and I had kind of gotten ready for this, I'm going to call it a lesson. But when I had to think about the death of my own friend, this is a friend of mine from high school. Okay, we went to Lubbock Christian High School together, all right? Itty bitty school. Anyway, we have stayed very close over the years, and I am standing at her bedside in the ICU in the Metroplex, holding her hand and asking her, telling her I'm here, and holding her hand and asking, I'm doing what all the nurses did. Have y'all ever been in a situation like this? Because I have with Brent. I went through, I'm great in ICUs. So before you decide to go to the ICU, you need to give me a text, because this was an undiscovered talent of mine, is sitting with people in ICU, sitting with the dying. I have sat and held my mother's hand as she passed from this life into the next. A good friend of mine, I sat with him. It is just something that God has blessed me with being able to do that I feel like came out of nowhere. I do care a lot about people, and I'm very overtly friendly, and so I can see that fitting in, but it's a special kind of thing to be able to sit with the dying. But I'm good at that. So before you die, let me know, okay? And I will come sit with you and hold your hand. And I will tell you, like I did Patty, I am here for you. I did the nurse. And they talk really loud. Have y'all ever been in a situation like that? And if you're talking to someone that you're trying to get to come out of sedation, you talk really loud. And I have a very loud voice anyway. And so I am talking loud to my friend, and I am holding her hand, and I'm saying, hey, Patty, you're in the ICU, but you're okay. You have a tube down your throat. It's gross and it's uncomfortable, but you're going to be okay. I'm here for you. Can you squeeze my hand? And she squeezed my hand. And I just happened to be the person, when she came off the sedation that day, yesterday, that happened to be the person who was talking to her when that happened. And then I said, oh, it's so good to see you. I said, this is really not a good way to get me to come see you, Patty. We have got to have a different plan when you get out of the ICU about how we're going to get to see each other, because we live in Lubbock, but we don't see each other enough. And I said, but Patty, I have to go, but I'll be right back, okay? Because I had to run to my brother's and get stuff and start getting ready to go. And she nodded her head at me. Y'all. And then when I start thinking about this, and this idea of freedom from the slavery of the fear of death, I had to think about this. I've always thought about this passage in terms of my own death, but I had to think about it in the terms of the death of someone else, someone who is my age, someone who is very close to me. It sort of broadened this out for me. So the way that I wanted to frame this is the first Sunday after the new year. And so I kind of wanted to frame this in a way that also helped walk us into a new year, a new trip around the sun. So I've done the colors. A number of you have said enough times, I really like the colors, please keep up the colors. So I'm keeping up the colors, okay? And we're gonna talk about all four of these things. In this small passage, we're gonna talk about all four of these things, and they move all around. But I thought that the colors are fun because color has meaning and associations with it. But anytime you see green, we're going to talk, this is truth or freedom is coming up. And then slavery, I have kind of an orange color. Fear is blue and death is purple. And the reason there's no red, right, is because his mama told me don't use red because I can't see it. And I said, no more red. There will be no more red because it just blends into the background for her. So there is no red. Y'all be sure and let Kara know that. No red. Okay. All right. So what I kind of was thinking is if one of these catches your eye, all right, you can kind of follow it through the passage by following the color. Also, fear should be capitalized right here because I think fear is the whole big overarching point that's going on in this passage. And from now on, after this slide, fear is in all caps because I really feel like that's where the passages are going. And fear has been coming up in the Sundays that I've been preaching. There has been some sort of underlying, how do we deal with fear? Do you have fear in your life? Why can we, and how can we get past fear? It's just been coming up all over the place. So, okay. All right, a New Year's question for you. On the first day of a new year, we usually begin with plans, all right? Hebrews, this passage, is going to suggest a better place to begin. So we're going to go back before you make plans, and Hebrews is going to give us an idea of where we can start before we start making those resolutions and things that we do at the beginning of the year. While we think about change and habits and goals, Hebrews starts with what is true. All right, and this truth is directly related to the idea of freedom in this passage, not what we plan. So instead of starting with what we planned, start with this basis of what Hebrews is going to give us, and then you start from there to make plans. So the problem is that we make plans, we make resolutions, and y'all have heard the phrase like, people make plans and God laughs, okay? I kind of prefer people make plans and God chuckles because I sort of kind of hear the chuckle every time I lay out plans, and God just kind of says, well, maybe, maybe not, okay? So I've heard that saying my whole life, right? So the diagnosis for this problem would be the fear of death is enslaving us, all right? And that's where we miss the point, is that we let that fear of death enslave us. All right. Now, where we're going to start next, we're going to read the passage. But no, before Hebrews tells us what to do or what plans to make, it tells us what is true. All right. This passage basically talks about the human condition. Hebrews 2:11b and 14 through 15. Jesus is not ashamed to call them brothers and sisters, since, therefore, the children share flesh and blood, he himself likewise shared the same things, so that through death he, Jesus, might destroy the one who has the power of death, that is, the devil, and free those, us, who all our lives have been and are being held in slavery by the fear of death. So the key point here is that Jesus frees us from the fear of death. But there's so much more. When you start unpacking this passage, there's so much more going on in here. For example, let's talk about fear for a moment. I think it's important to understand how fear kind of acts in us. All right, so the key point is that fear often precedes the actual event. For example, when Brent Carroll, my dear beloved, absolutely fantastic, I am so glad God gave him to me husband, terrified me, and not for the last time. Okay? Y'all, I have talked about this before. Brent is a leukemia survivor, but I need to give you a little bit of the backstory to understand this idea of fear of before the event. I think, I hate to describe myself like this because people think I'm saying something negative about myself, but I'm kind of a weirdo, y'all. Okay? I kind of embrace my weirdness. Like, I like to dress up, and so I like the Middle Ages, and so I like to go to Renaissance festivals. I have a whole closet in my house with Renaissance festival garb, okay? I can dress up as all kinds of different things. And you know who I go with? Patty, my friend Patty. We call each other our Ren Fair spouse because both of our spouses were like, y'all have fun, okay? So Patty and I go and we hang out together and we have friends that we see. I've been doing this for 25 years. I have friends I only see every year at the Ren Fair, and we're like, hey, like I have a whole set of friends that I only see once a year at Renaissance festivals, y'all, where all the rest of the weird people go, okay? So I am at one of these, right? It's the early 2000s. I'm at one of these Renaissance festivals, and I am having a blast. I am running around. I happen to be up kind of by the gate. Some of these things have acres in them. They're huge. But the one that I'm at this time, I'm up kind of by the front gate. I look up. My father and his wife, who live in the Metroplex, this Ren Fair was in the Metroplex, are inside the gate, and they are walking really fast, and they have really scary faces on. And I look up, and I'm like, Dad, Shug, what's going on? And they say, you need to go home right now because Brent is in the ER in Lubbock. And I immediately am overcome by fear because I have no idea what could have put my 40-something-year-old husband in the ER. I don't stop for a second to think about what I'm wearing. I grab my purse, I get in the car, I drive to Lubbock. I actually change clothes at some point. I don't remember when, but I realize I can't go to the ER dressed in all my jingly, crazy Ren Fair stuff, okay? I have stuff on my hair, I have things in my head, I have huge earrings on, I have 14 skirts on. I mean, y'all, it's a thing, okay? So I go ahead and change at some point, I don't even remember when. I get there, and I take one look at my husband, and the left side of his face, he looks like he's been in a boxing match. His face is so swollen, this half of his face is so swollen that his ear is about this far from his head. His eye is swollen shut. And we have no idea what's going on. And I look at him and I say, Brent, what is going on? And he said, and I quote, this is what I get for picking a zit. I was like, what? So apparently what happened is he had leukemia. We did not know, but it had already started to ravage his body. Well, he messes around with some zit on his face right over here, and it got infected, and like that, it just blew up the side of his face. So I have so much fear going on. So first of all, when I see Dad and Shug and they say Brent's in the hospital, I immediately am overcome by fear, okay? I don't know what's going on with my husband. I don't know if he's dying. I don't know if he's going to be dead when I get there. I don't know any of those things, okay? So I have all of this fear that's preceding the actual event of me seeing Brent. Then I get there and I see Brent, and the side of his face is swelled out to here with infection, right? And the doctor is saying, throwing around words like leukemia and don't be the second young man I've diagnosed with leukemia today, please. Things like this are being thrown around. And then now I'm afraid he's going to die. I have these 4 kids. I'm still in school. I don't know how I'm going to pay for everything. Like, I have all of these fear of events that are going to happen because my husband is sick, okay? So what I learned in that point was that, is that fear is not the event itself, but it's the possibility of an event. So my fear is not caused by the event of my husband being sick. It's caused by my fear of what's going to happen if he dies, okay? That is what is happening to me. All right, so key concepts. The fear that we're talking about right here isn't just an emotion, but it's a ruling narrative. Like, I have to choose at this moment when Brent is so sick to let my fear of what might happen control my narrative, control this narrative of Brent's illness, all right? And then slavery in this context is when fear starts making decisions for us. How do I react to that fear? All right, if I become enslaved to that fear, the fear starts making my decisions. I decide to panic. I decide that, yes, Brent's going to die and I'm going to be a widow at 40, and how am I going to finish school? How am I going to afford to feed our children? All of these things. I'll be alone, okay? That's when what this passage means by slavery. And then freedom in this passage is not fearlessness. It's okay to be afraid, but fear no longer being our master. And I had to consciously choose not to let fear master me when Brent was so sick, because this was we probably spent 4 to 5 years in and out of a hospital. So every 3 to 6 months, my husband would have to go into the hospital, and they would have to put him on a different antibiotic to try to control the leukemia until we got him into remission. And y'all, I cannot explain to you how fast I can set up a hospital room. I know exactly how Brent wanted the bed made. I mean, we knew how to get in and out of the hospitals that he was in, and we knew all the places to park, and I mean, it was ridiculous. And then he went into remission, and we both were like, well, okay, this is kind of nice. But we had to stop thinking about the possibility of his death and had to start thinking about what do we have today? What's going on, and not letting the fear control us. So freedom is fear no longer being our master. So the key point is when Hebrews says slavery, it is not exaggerating, but instead it's describing what happens when fear becomes the lens through which we interpret everything. So if you take any situation and you interpret it through fear, that is slavery. Okay, so this concept of slavery by fear, I think is really interesting. And so I started thinking about and looking for examples of what this passage could possibly mean by the slavery of fear. And it started describing, some of the things I found started describing fear like this. Fear makes demands of us, and it sets boundaries for us. So fear tells us, don't be vulnerable. Because if you're vulnerable, something could happen. So don't let yourself be vulnerable, all right? It also tells you not to take risks, okay? Don't take any risks. I mean, if that looks like risky, even if the reward is good, just don't take any risks. Also, do not tell the truth if it costs you, all right? So if the truth is going to cost you, don't do that. Don't tell that. That's what fear tells you. Do not tell the truth if it's going to cost you. Don't hope too much. Okay? Don't hope too much, because, your hopes are just going to get dashed. Fear tells you don't hope too much, because that might not happen. And the one thing fear does tell you to do is protect yourself. All right? So this slavery by fear involves all of these things, and these are the things that fear sets up for us. So I think the key point here is slavery in this passage is talking about living under something that controls your choices. All right, so you now are no longer controlling your choices. Fear is controlling your choices. So God has a plan for all of this, and this is where I think the root and the main point of the passage we're looking at today comes in, is because it's part of God's plan, which I personally think that you could write an entire book on this little bit that we're doing right here. There is so much packed into this tiny, tiny little bit of verses. Okay, so God's plan is Jesus, shared flesh and blood with us. All right? Jesus does not help from a distance. He enters real human life. He enters it with weakness, with grief, with pain and loss, and ultimately he enters with death. So Jesus has experienced these things with us. And so the fear that we have is a fear that he has felt. All right? And we can know that he can relate to us from this level, not this level. All right, and this is a teacher thing. This is especially an English teacher thing. I absolutely love when people say or talk about things like death through death. Okay, this kind of it's sort of oxymoronic language absolutely thrills my soul. All right, so the key point is that this death is overcome through the actual death of someone else. So it's almost like this cycle. Okay, so death is defeated by death, which is then again defeated by death, which would then defeat by death. By our own deaths, we defeat death. Okay, it's this lovely, incredible, incredible cycle. So what the passage says is through death, he, Jesus, might destroy the one who has the power of death. I also like the way that this verse is written because it starts with death and it ends with death, which makes it its own cycle within the verse. All right? So in this case, too, I think that what the passage is implying is that this kind of destroy means to break the power. It means to remove the leverage. And I like this word leverage in one of the sources, that there's this idea of leverage, okay? And the leverage that's used against us is the fear of death. And that's the leverage. That's the thing that gets shoved in here, right? That kind of leverages or moves us in the direction that Satan wants us to move, all right? That's the leverage that will start controlling us, give someone else or something else control over us. So this is God's plan, is to get Jesus to share these things so that we know that he knows, and that through his death he has defeated death, which means that through our death we also can defeat death. So we don't really have a reason to fear it, okay? All right. I had to include a poem here because this reminds me, I see you juggling. This is John Donne's Holy Sonnet 10. I love John Donne's, his whole life, all of his sonnets. But I think, I can't prove this, but I think that Donne may have been thinking about this passage when he wrote this poem. I think it just dovetails perfectly into this poem. So I'm going to read this poem for you. A literary example, John Donne's Holy Sonnet 10. He wrote this sometime in the year 1609. Death, death, be not proud, though some have called thee mighty and dreadful, for thou, death, art not so. For those men whom you think thou dost overthrow die not, poor death, nor canst thou, death, kill me. Thou, death, art slave to fate, to chance, to kings and desperate men, and you, death, dost with poison, war, and sickness dwell, and poppy or charms can make us men sleep as well and better than thy stroke. Why swellest thou, death, then? One short sleep past, we men wake eternally, and you, death, shall be no more. Death, thou shalt die. Okay, I don't know about y'all, but I just get all like tingly when I read things like that. The first time I read this poem, and I read that last line, I was intrigued with the idea of death dying. But that's exactly what happens. That's exactly what this passage that we're studying is telling us, that because of Jesus' death, death died because Jesus rose. And because Jesus rose, through our death, death will also die. But eventually, at the end, there aren't going to be any more people to die, and death itself is going to die. What an incredible image that is. All right, so let's talk about this death through death really quick. I think I've taken too long. So the key point is Jesus breaks fear's grip on us by going through and conquering the very thing we fear most, and that is death. And here's why fear eventually loses, because fear assumes that death gets the final word, but death does not get the final word. Jesus goes into death, comes out on the other side, and so will we. Therefore, I love this part. Again, language, Olga, language, all right? If death is not final, then fear is not the ultimate truth. If fear is not the ultimate truth, then slavery to the fear of death can end. And we can be free from the slavery of the fear of death. We can be free from that. Just imagine how great life is going to be when you just don't even have to worry about it anymore. You're like, I don't have to be afraid of you anymore. You know, like, or whatever. Okay, anyway. Nanny, nanny, boo, boo. Anybody remember that? Okay. All right. So I had to, one of my other loves, wildly, besides language, is math. And, but I think language is just a verbal mathematical system. But anyway, so I wrote this little semi-formula down here. If death is not final, then fear is not truth, and slavery is abolished. So real fast, what freedom looks like. This is another thing I was interested in, because the freedom that you get from this isn't what you would think. I think the freedom you get from this is that you have the freedom to tell the truth even when it's hard. You have the freedom to choose to love even when it costs you, us. We can set aside our need to control. That's what freedom looks like. We can hope even while we're grieving. That's the freedom that this passage is promising us. So the key point is freedom means fear no longer makes our decisions or choices for us. Death has no claim on us, nor does the slavery and fear that comes with death. No longer has any power over us. That is what the freedom is going to look like. So I want to read this one more time. Jesus is not ashamed to call us brothers and sisters, since therefore we share flesh and blood. He himself likewise shared the same things, so that through death he, Jesus, might destroy the one who has the power of death, that is the devil, and free those, us, who all our lives have been held in slavery by the fear of death. So to close, there's also another truth that I think is running along the bottom of this, and that is that we do not have to journey alone through the slavery of the fear of death. All we have to do is look around or look up. And I want to leave you with one last thought, and that is, may we all begin 2026 living like those whom Christ has freed, with confidence in the one who has already conquered death. Would you all pray with me, please? Father, you are mighty and good, and we are so grateful that we can come to you together and separately as individuals and as a collective. Father, thank you for our families and our lives and our friends and our food, and even, Father, sometimes for our struggles, because they can bring us closer to you. Father, I pray that we will be freed from the slavery of the fear of death, because we know, Father, that you have conquered it, and we know that you will help us prepare for it. And we know, Father, that you want to be in control instead of us being in control, and that you want us to not fear death, because Jesus has died for us. It's through your Son's name that we pray. Amen.